Howdy folks, back here in the shop. I'm gonna move on to the cost of ownership on the 7.3 kind of discussion. This is kind of gonna blend into just generic automotive, cost of ownership as well, because that's what it is. But anyways, so we'll get into this. Now, one thing I did not want to cover on this, because I feel like everybody beats it like a dead horse and you don't even need to talk about it anymore, but fuel economy, gas versus diesel comparisons, that type of thing. I'm not even going to get into that as far as a cost of ownership metric, right? So anyways, moving on from there. I think that a key component to having low cost of ownership with any pickup, really anything, but especially with the diesels, right? Because they can be temperamental if you don't get the right one. So I think finding the right one and being selective in that is key, right? And that's going to save you in the long run on your overall cost of ownership. If you find one that's been not beat to piss and really just, it's fine if it's been used, right? But if it's been maintained, right? So that kind of goes into the maintenance records discussion as well as the expense of the maintenance. And I think the maintenance expense is going to be completely another video potentially in the future because there's so much to it. But with that said, when I found that pickup, right, it was a one-owner truck, and the other nice thing with it is the original owner. This is actually the binder that he gave me. This was the original, the printed, worn off from the last piece of paper that was slid in here. And so he had given me this with all the maintenance records. So from day one, the original owner had this thing serviced at the dealership where he purchased it. And like the first oil change here, a little bit higher than I would have gone on a first oil change by far, but 5,142 miles, first oil change. And then from there, everything is beautifully cataloged from the original owner. And myself, so there was myself there when I actually replaced the bed, because when I bought that pickup, anyways, it had a dent in the bed, on the bed rail. So with that said, I think maintenance records are a key component to a long, trouble-free service for a vehicle. So I've kind of got all these guys. Now, as far as maintenance expense, I do believe that these, we'll call them pre-emissions era diesels are extremely cost effective and extremely cheap to maintain. On the Powerstroke, since I got it, I really have not, aside from thinking about performance mods, right? If we're just thinking about ignoring those expenses that I've dumped into this pickup, if I wouldn't have done any of those, this thing would have been absolutely cheap. I mean, really, it comes down to oil filters, oil, and a little bit of diesel fuel supplement, and the occasional fuel filter change about every 20,000 miles, as we kind of talked about in that last video, depending on your area that you live in. But I always run Motorcraft FL 1995 filters. They're $10. You can buy oil typically, especially if you buy it on sale. You can buy conventional 1540 pretty much all day long. You could do the oil itself for say $60. So that's cheaper than a lot of people these days pay for gas oil changes, especially with the synthetic oils out there. And if you do it yourself, it is cheap. Now, if you take your 7.3 into a freaking dealership or a shop, they're going to charge you an arm and a leg. It's ridiculous. And I guess with that, as far as I attribute lots of trouble years of service with the fuel system, injectors, to always running some type of fuel injector, anti-gel cleaner, whether we be running some hot shots, just some CRC. I've ran power service, Stanodyne. It just depends kind of what I'm doing with what I'm putting in there, right? So other than that truck has been very cheap on the maintenance side. Now, as far as repairs go, let's see. I think the original owner under warranty had the alternator replaced. I've had to replace some O-rings on the high pressure oil side of the pickup. overall, you know, anything like that, you're just gonna, with age of a vehicle like that, you're gonna have it go bad. And the overall cost of that stuff, if you do it yourself, isn't that terribly difficult, and it's pretty cheap. I mean, you're talking O-rings, right? So with that said, hub assemblies, replaced a couple of those. Those are expensive, but you know, anything with mileage, you're gonna have to replace those too, whether it be a gas truck, a diesel truck, right? So anyways, I firmly believe and stand behind the cost of maintenance expense on these trucks is extremely reasonable, right? Insurance expense. This obviously is going to vary for a lot of people. You know, multi-vehicle policy, single owner, driving history, but for my, if you will, my fleet of insanity, right? And I'm pretty much only have one vehicle at a time that's out on, you might say, road insurance. Everything else is on storage insurance at one given point in time. So my entire monthly insurance expense is, if you could break it down monthly, is about $140 a month, which I think is extremely reasonable. And the 7.3, since it was always on the road and not in storage for the most part, it accounts for the largest percentage of that expense. And I do have extremely high coverage limits on it and everything. And I still think that that's reasonable. Taxes and fees, right? You know, this is a locality thing, right? You know, if you're in Colorado, in the diesel, in the Front Range, you got to pay the absolute bullshit every year annual emissions testing, which, you know, can go $60 to $200 at those private centers. Now, if you don't have to deal with that, you know, obviously there's a upside. Now, where I am now in Montana, right, I've got permanent plates. I paid my $200 fee on the truck because it's old enough, and now I never have to do it again. But in certain states, you have weight, you know, they calculate weight sometimes on the type of vehicle, more than likely. And like on this Ram over here, you know, it's because it's newer, it's doesn't qualify for permanent plates yet, and it's about $500 a month. But as far as the 7.3, since they're older, you know, up here, that thing is dirt cheap for me on a taxes and fees registration basis annually, because I don't have to do it. Cost per mile, right? Now, this is where I think how I really like to think about how inexpensive this truck has been for me over, you know, since I picked it up in 2007. Cost per mile, right? And depreciation expense for what I paid for it to what I could sell it for now, realistically, right? And how many miles did I put on that? How much does each mile cost me in depreciation? So I'm going to take a peek at this. Voila. All right. Yes, and I will be using those paper towels for, I'm sure, something, not just throwing them out. So 7.3, right? I paid $21.5, and I bet that even if I sat on it for a month, no, without a doubt in my mind, I could sell that truck for $15,000. Clean her up really nice. I mean, she runs good, right? I mean, paint's overall in good shape. Interiors for 7.3 is probably in the uppers. I'm sure some people would say 90%, but I'm going to say in the upper, you know, like say 80 percentile, you know, above 80 percentile of quality and cleanliness on the interior. So anyways, I had about 76,000 miles, and now she's at about 256K. So I put about 180,000 on it, and 6,500 basically, right, is my depreciation there between what I paid for it and then what I could sell it now for. And we're obviously excluding maintenance expense into that calculation. But yeah, about 3.6 cents per mile is what that truck has cost me in depreciation, which I don't think you can beat that, right? Now, let's just say back then, if I would have bought like a V10 Powerstroke, or excuse me, a V10 instead of a Powerstroke, or maybe a 6-liter gas GM truck, or, you know, maybe like a 454 GM truck, something of that nature, right? You're talking obviously less fuel economy, but that's what we talked about earlier. We're not going to talk about fuel economy. But, you know, at the time, I remember I was seeing a Lariat, Crew, V10, you know, I could get them for about 18, maybe a little less even. Now, if I were to put 180K on that, just like I did mine, you know, let's just say you keep the interior cherry, paint is cherry, you know, after you get one of these gassers to 256,000 miles, you're about worn her out. I mean, in my opinion, especially for heavy service use. So, anyways, if you were lucky enough to get $9,000 out of it, you might get $6,000, whatever. But that's still pretty reasonable cost per mile, 5 cents a mile. Now I like to just throw in the new truck discussion, right? Because new trucks are outrageous now. It's absolutely stupid, and it's only going to get worse. So, in my opinion, lock in what you want now, and hopefully it'll last just till you're dead. So let's just say you bought a 2018 F-150 new. I was looking, I found one used at a Ford dealer, and I found the window sticker for it. It was $64,000 MSRP new, okay? It's a Lariat, Crew, fairly optioned out, but not crazy options, right? First of all, I think buying a half-ton for $64,000 is absolutely insane. You know, the MSRP on this was 67, for example. So, the depreciation on half tons is stupid. That not so much. I am very confident if I wanted to, I could sell that for more money now because of the G56, and the cost of these trucks is just insane. So. Now, this truck, we probably would have had a rough, you know, off the dealer new sell price for about $57K after your rebates, discounts, and we're obviously not factoring in interest expense if you were to finance a vehicle in any of these equations. But that truck was on sale for about $33,000. I just say 32, just because that's probably what you get it down to, right? To get it out of the door, out the dealer, you can probably haggle them a little, right? So that's $25,000 loss. That truck had like 59,000 miles on it. So basically 60,000 miles. Now, that's 41 cents a mile in depreciation on these new trucks. That's freaking insane. So anyways, that kind of goes back just to the very beginning. If you're looking for a truck, I still think that these older diesels, whether it be a 12 valve, 24 valve, these Duramax trucks, these pre-emission diesels, are a killer deal if you can find them. And even if you find one that needs a little bit of, you know, TLC, and you pick her up for, let's say, $7,000 or $8,000 and it needs some love, I totally think it's worth it, because you're never gonna, like these 7.3s. You know, I was just looking on Craigslist a little bit ago. There was an extended cab, 2007-3 Lariat. Had like 230,000 miles on it, and you know, you see them all on Craigslist. You know, people are selling them for, you know, that's a extended cab, and they're selling them for 10 to 12.5, and a crew cabs always fetch a little bit more. And that truck had wheel well rust, and it's just anyways, to get back to the point, is the cost of ownership now with these trucks. If you can get a nice clean one that you feel comfortable with, I think that you can't go wrong with it, and you're never going to lose money on it, really, in reality. You're never going to have this 41 cents a mile depreciation buying a new one. The fuel economy is not that much better in the new ones, and if you're 32,000, whatever. I mean, you buy one of these used Powerstrokes for 15, 12, 10, you know, something like that, and you're going to get down the road and probably throw another 100K on it and be able to get ahead of the game. So I guess with that, I'll leave it, and if anybody has any comments or questions, feel free to drop them below, and I'll get back with you. And if you think I'm absolutely silly for thinking the cost of ownership of a 7.3 is low, that's fine. I want to hear it. Take it easy. Have a good night.